today I wanted to talk to you guys about a couple of different options for gardening beds and for doing it raised gardening beds kind of cheap. It still costs money and it is a big expense, but for the cost you get a lot of return out of what you put in, and it has worked better for us than in-ground beds. The raised beds are a lot easier to keep weed free, and the dirt that we put in them helps the plants a lot, and we don't have to amend the soil as much. We do amend it every time we pull a crop. We will put compost down on it, but that's not that bad of an expense to put compost down maybe twice a year. And we have chickens, so we put their compost from the chickens on the beds also. And so it's just a good way to get a really good crop. I have been gardening for almost 14 years, but I would say until I did the raised beds, which was about 4 years ago, that was the time when I actually got a very good harvest, and I have every year after, and I'm still learning and getting better at what I grow, but it has been rewarding to have these raised garden beds. And I have two different kinds, and the main reason that I have two different kinds is just because of the price point. So at the time when we built this bed, which is a cinder block bed, we're cheaper than using wood. And we've got quite a few beds here. We've got 6 beds inside the fence, and then there's one more bed out here that's outside of the fence that's got garlic in it right now. And then this bed also has garlic in it, and we put this in November, and we usually harvest in June. So we get the scapes in the spring, and then we harvest the bulb in the summer. And once we harvest the bulb, we save bulbs for planting the next season, and then we save bulbs for putting in the freezer and using fresh and using throughout the year. So that's why we grow a pretty good bit of garlic every year. So this raised bed was the first raised bed that we built, and we used the cinder blocks because it was cheaper than wood, and then we put this black plastic down, which is not looking too great at this point, but it's there and it helps. It's got some holes in it, and this was just the cheapest black plastic that we could find. And so we put this down, and we actually put mulch on it that first year that we built this bed. And after 2 years, it was all decomposed and it had turned into dirt. And we had a bunch of grass growing in it, and it was a big job to keep up with. So we decided we swept and shoveled out all the dirt, and we just leave it bare every year, and we continue to sweep it and keep the leaves and stuff off of it. So that's why we put the plastic down, because we didn't want a bunch of weeds growing in the garden. And we didn't use garden plastic. This is just a very basic plastic, and we didn't want to have weeds growing in the beds, so that's why we put it down. And we were trying to do this as cheap as possible. So the other thing that we did was we fenced the bed, which we fenced all the way around, but I did put the fence right up against the edges of my beds here, which I have found out was a mistake, because the grass grows right here in between this cinder block and the fence, and it's really hard to keep it clean during the summer. We do our best to keep it clean, but that doesn't mean that it doesn't get looking a little gnarly because of the grass growing. So that was a mistake that I made in this bed, was backing that fence right up to the edge of the bed. I would have left a gap there, which I did. I'll show you in the other bed what I did to remedy that mistake. So this whole cinder block bed and the dirt that went in it, which I bought the dirt from a local nursery, that's where I buy all my dirt. It's compost mixed with potting soil. And so for this all of these beds and the plastic and everything, it was about $1,000 to do all these cinder blocks and get the dirt and put the plastic. So that was the cost that went into this bed. The fencing we had from previous fences that we had built at a different property, and we pulled all our fencing and brought all our fencing here to this smaller property. So that's why we had that. So let me take you to the next bed that we built, because we liked this so much and it was producing so much food. We wanted to be able to produce more food. So we built another bed that's the same size as this bed. It has 8 beds in it. And the fencing, we did the same thing, just I think we did have to buy a new roll of fencing for this one. So it's just the regular fencing here, and it doesn't even really have a door. We just always cut our fencing longer and wrap it around, bring it to this pole here. But this is the second bed that we made, and this is a wood bed. So when we made this past summer, we had planned to do cinder blocks again, but the wood was actually cheaper this summer. So what we did is we bought the wood. And we also did the garden plastic this time. We spent a little more on that because we thought this will last longer. And again, we won't put mulch on it because we just can't afford to buy mulch every year to relay on these paths to keep it from growing over. And we can't do Chip Drop, never comes out here. I was on their list for 2 years and I never once got contacted for somebody to come drop off some mulch or chips or anything. So I couldn't count on that, and buying mulch is pretty expensive when you're talking about you're wanting to keep weeds down and you have to continuously keep new mulch on it. So we just decided that we're not gonna put mulch in between these beds. We just have the garden plastic, and that should be good. So remember the mistake I made in the other bed of backing the fence right up to the edge of the beds? I didn't do that here. I left a path so that I could walk all the way around, and I actually made the paths wider so that we could get a wagon in and out, which we can't do on the other cinder block bed. So that is 2 things that I did differently, was make these paths bigger, and we used the wood on this one. So we used the same dirt. We called the same local nursery that we always use, and we got the compost mixed with potting soil. And I think it was a whole dump truck, and we used it to fill these, and then we topped off the other beds when we got that dirt. So it was a lot of dirt, and it goes a long way. So this whole setup cost about the same as the other one, which is around $1,000, and that's for the wood, the dirt, the plastic. We did buy a roll of fencing for this one. So it cost about the same, but we just went with whatever was cheaper at the time. So a few years ago, the cinder blocks were cheaper than the wood, but this year the wood was cheaper than the cinder blocks, or this past year. So that's why we went with that. And that's kind of how we keep things here at our little homestead, is we just do what we can with what we have. Like, for example, the poles on this aren't even poles that match. They're not all the same size. I think we did buy a couple of poles, and I didn't have plastic down in this little spot right here behind this last bed, which is probably not going to be good come summer. But my ducks are right over here beside my garden bed, so I'm thinking they should keep it down. They like to stick their heads through and get in the grass. And then I've got my little chickens over here. So ducks and chickens. So they're close to the garden so that I can use their byproduct to fertilize things. And then I can throw waste over to them. So that's how these garden beds work, and we really like them. They have produced very well for us, and it's a lot of space. I believe this is 8x4, and the cinder block bed is 8x4 also, but it takes up more space because of the way the cinder block is. So the dirt inside of it is a little less than the dirt inside of these wooden ones, but they're about the same, and they can grow a lot of food. And so I've got a couple of things here that have survived the really cold weather. This is growing really slow, but this is some spinach. I think it's Bloomsdale spinach, and a lot of it kind of died off. I planted them really close together, but they seem to be doing okay. I picked a couple off of them, and then I've got my kale here, which was looking pretty bad for a while, but it seems like this is the red Russian kale, and it seems like it's bounced back. But this is the Los Santos kale, and I'm not really sure if it's gonna come back. It's looking pretty bad. Usually my kale survives the winter, but that was a pretty hard frost we had a few weeks ago, so I'm not sure if it'll survive or not. So I hope that was encouraging and you got to see some different kinds of garden beds, and know that it is a big cost up front. $1,000 is a lot of money to spend on a garden bed, but I have had that cinder block bed for 4 years and it has produced so much food for me. So it's well worth the cost to be able to sustain your family and help with your grocery bills. It's definitely worth it. And that money you will save, and you will get lots of benefits and rewards from the garden. The food tastes so much better than anything you can buy at the store, and you don't have to use chemicals on it. You can use natural ingredients if you're having bug problems. I'm not saying that that's the best option, that it actually gets rid of the bugs, but you can have it organic as you want it to be. And you can put so many things in it that you could not get at the store. So the joy of a garden and the produce that it makes definitely makes it worth it to invest that one-time investment to build yourself a garden and produce food for your family. It is a rewarding experience, and it'll get people eating vegetables that they didn't even know they liked because you grew them and they have amazing flavor. So I hope that's a little encouragement to just maybe take the plunge and get that garden bed. And it doesn't have to be as big as mine. It doesn't have to be that big if you're not that big of a family, or if you don't want to can your food and preserve it, which is what I do. I try to grow as much food as I can for my family. So I needed lots of garden beds, but you could do it as small as you wanted to, and that would be a cheaper cost. And any kind of garden bed will produce a good amount for you to at least supplement and have some sustainability in your backyard, because that's what this is. This is my backyard, and we only live on 3/4 of an acre, but I've got these two humongous garden beds, the wood and the cinder block. And I've got my chickens over here and my ducks, and they produce eggs and compost. So there's just a lot of things that you can do with a garden, and you can use your yard for that space. And it is a thing of beauty also when you have a full garden in summer. It is so pretty. So it can be what you want it to be, and it does take just a little cost up front, which we saved. We saved money to be able to do these garden beds, and we made sure that we saved and we knew we wanted to do them, and we accomplished that goal. So we get to grow lots of food and preserve food for our family. So I hope you guys enjoy gardens as much as me, and know that even though there's an upfront cost, in the end, for the amount of time that you get out of it, because these will last for years and years, it's definitely worth it.